Want to thank everyone for attending today. Again, my name is Chris Lee with the California State Association of Counties. We're lucky to be joined today by a great group of panelists from the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency of the state of California. We've also got folks on from our friends at the Housing and Community Development Department. Today's webinar is focused on SB 91, which extended some of the eviction protections that were passed last year in response to the coronavirus pandemic. It also deploys the state funding from the federal COVID relief bill. So we're talking today largely about the funding. The target audience today really is the 200,000 plus population counties. We have another webinar scheduled for next week focusing more on the smaller counties, but I know there are a lot of questions. We're really happy to have a great group of panelists here. And so without further delay, I'm going to kick it over to Veronica Harms from the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency to kick off the presentations. Veronica, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you to CSAC for putting on this webinar for us today. I also just want to mention we have representatives from our Department of Finance on the webinar as well, so thank you for joining us. And today, we're really just excited to be here to answer questions, as Chris said, on SB 91 and the new rental assistance program that will be starting in early March. You'll be hearing today from Lynn Von Koch-Lieber, our Deputy Secretary of Housing for the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, and Amy Wilson, our Deputy Secretary of Legislation for the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency as well. And as Chris mentioned, the purpose of the meeting today is really to go over SB 91, the protections afforded in the bill, and also an outline of the options with the rental assistance program. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Amy Wilson.
Hello, good morning, everyone. As Veronica already mentioned, my name is Amy Wilson. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Legislation at Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. I'm just going to briefly touch on kind of the statutory provisions within the bill before handing it over to my colleague Lynn. So as you know, the bill was passed by the legislature and signed right at the end of the month on the eve of the repeal of the or the sunset of the prior AB 3088 bill related to evictions. And what it does essentially is it has kind of two chunks of subject area. The first relates to all the tenant and property owner homeowner protections. And then the second chunk relates to the rental assistance program. So Veronica, if you can switch the slide, I'll just briefly touch on the eviction protections and obligations of the bill. So the protections that were in place under AB 3088 are extended now through June 30th, 2021. And it's basically the same framework that was established before. So tenants that are experiencing a COVID-19 related financial hardship can attest to that fact using a declaration that is set forth in the law, and it can be found either on our public websites, housingiskey.com, but also is provided by the landlord. And those tenants, provided that they have attested, done the proper attestation, they are protected from unlawful detainer action for the covered period through June 30th, provided and thereafter, provided that they make a 25% payment of monthly rent for that same time period. It can be paid on a monthly basis. It can be paid as a lump sum on the eve of that June 30th or combinations thereof. An important nuance is that the debt still accrues, the money is still owed, but it cannot be grounds for eviction after the end of that covered period. It becomes something known as civil debt, which can be recoverable through the courts. But that ties into the rental assistance portion of the program and of the bill, which is our every effort to reduce those arrears that have been accruing during this period. Let's see, there are a few other additional protections related to tenants, related to the use of fees and security deposits, et cetera. But the main thing is the extension of that protection. Next slide, please. And then very briefly, the bill also extends to September 1 the same consumer protections that were in 3088 related to homeowners, borrowers. Basically, if a lender denies a mortgage forbearance request, there are some additional protections in there for allowing a reconsideration if there are any missing pieces of information or deficiencies. Those can be corrected within 21 days and allow for a reconsideration. Next slide. And then, of course, I think the piece of information most pertinent to today, and thank you for your patience, is the portion of the bill that relates to the rental assistance program. And this program was designed basically to reflect the emphasis and obviously in compliance with the federal act that sends to states the money through the U.S. Treasury. And the focus of the federal program and of ours as well is to stabilize low-income households through the payment of rental arrears to landlords. And the federal eligibility is set, and that is directly written into our program as well, that eligible households have to be at or below 80% of the area median income. And there's a specific priority, though, for those households under 50% of the AMI. And the design sets forth that participating landlords will be compensated 80% of any unpaid rent from the eligible households that of their tenants between the period of April 1, 2020, so from last year, continuing through March 31, 2021. And when they accept that payment, that 80% payment, they accept it as payment in full for all any balance for all the rental debt that is owed by that eligible household for that same period. We're going to be working very actively to emphasize landlord participation, but if the landlord refuses to participate, the eligible household still can apply and receive 25% of any of the back rent owed for that same period. If they've already made their 25% payment, then it would be a 25% of any remaining. If they have not been able to cover their 25% payment, then this would assure that they, at a minimum, are protected and covered by meeting the statutory obligations to make that payment through the covered period. So that's it briefly, and I'm now going to invite my colleague Lynn von Koch-Liebert to pick it up from here and talk about our statewide program.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so let's jump right in. Veronica, if I could go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so I'll start by just giving a quick overview of the funding stream for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. So as it was mentioned, California is receiving roughly $2.6 billion in the ERAP resources. That's going to be split 55-45 between a U.S. Treasury direct allocation to the state at $1.498 billion and a U.S. Treasury direct allocation to cities and counties with populations over 200,000 at $1.113 billion. Within the state share of ERAP, we're going to start by taking a carve out off of the top of $150 million and reserving that for counties with populations that are under 200,000. And then those will be reserved at the county level population and inclusive of the cities within those counties. We know that from the federal legislation, there can be no more than 10% administrative fee. And then there's roughly $1.32 billion that will go that will be reserved for cities and counties with populations over 200,000. And that for that distribution, the state is following the federal allocation structure with reserving a share of the population for cities and counties by population for those over 200,000. So looking at those two boxes explain when we're talking about the state reservation table, what that means. And just to really help with the terminology, we've been calling the direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury to cities and counties over 200,000, the U.S. Treasury direct allocation. Veronica, next slide. Thanks. And on this chart, you can see a quick snapshot of what that distribution or reservation table looks like. So this is posted on our website, and it was also in the expression of intent letter that we communicated out to all of the counties. And the way that this reads is that you can see the bolded county name is shown on the left-hand column. And then if there is a indented city name, that's a city within the county that has a direct allocation as well. And so the way to read this at the county level is to look at the bolded county line. So we'll just look at, Butte, for example, and then just roll across to see then what we estimated Butte received directly from the federal government, and then the reservation size that we have set aside at the state, and then the combined total, so that we can see by population and jurisdiction what the estimated ERAP program is. Next slide. So getting into the program requirements, the U.S. Treasury did include a number of program requirements, and we're still waiting for a bit more information to come out through their guideline process, or through their FAQ and their guidance process. But at the top level, some of the key points are that not less than 90% is required for direct financial assistance. There, as Amy mentioned, there's the eligible household requirement. So renter household with one or more of the following criterias, either qualifies for employment, unemployment, or experience reduction in household income, demonstrates a risk of experience homelessness or housing instability, or the household income is at or below 80% of the area median income. The Treasury does require documentation, and they list out essentially what that means. And they also do require that the programs demonstrate no duplication of federal rental assistance per household over the same time period. The Treasury caps at 12 months of assistance plus an additional 3 months, and it does prioritize rental arrears before future rental payments are made. The Treasury says applications can be submitted by a landlord on behalf of an eligible household or by that eligible household itself. And in general, payments are made directly to landlord and utility service providers. But if a landlord does not wish to participate, then the funds may be paid to the eligible household. It does include structured reporting requirements around the use of the funds. And then it does have this September 30th time where 65% of the funds must be obligated, or the U.S. Treasury can begin to pull back those funding and then reallocate them to other states and jurisdictions. And the funds at the top level then expire on December 31st, 2021. So when we are talking about the state program, essentially what we've done is we've taken the ERAP requirements and laid on top of those the SB 91 requirements, which then we're calling the Conforming Program. Okay, next slide. So for the Conforming Program, the central administered program done through the state will be following this structure. And then cities and counties that are requesting a state block grant will then be also required to conform the local implementation of their federal allocation to the standard, the Conform program. Really, the key here is around consistency, both in terms of how the program, or the impact on tenants and households and what they're able to achieve through this program, simplification of messaging, and then the really important part of helping make this as standard as possible for landlords who are trying to participate in this program. We've heard a lot through a number of our workshops and listening sessions that landlord take-up has been challenging, and we believe that by having uniformity as much as possible across the state, we can really help bring landlords to the table in a meaningful way. So we have posted on our website, and here's the link here, a one-pager that really goes into what this means in terms of conforming the federal dollars to match the state program. And we're going to put out full guidance in the coming day or two. But the high points go back to some of the comments that Amy mentioned about the parameters of SB 91. So first is really about aligning the prioritization of resources. So that is kind of principally prioritizing households at or below 50% AMI and then up to 80% AMI or unemployed for 90 or more days. But what we want to make really clear is that we know that counties have already been thinking about their very specific demographics and what they want to prioritize more deeply. So we're hearing, and we're certainly allowing, as part of the conformity, deeper income targeting, prioritization by rent burden, prioritization by qualified census tract, prioritization by property size, and other factors that really fit in with the intent of this clause. To conform, there is a prioritization of rental arrears first, but then once you have demonstrated through demand in your applications that that rental arrears have been met for eligible households, then of course the federal eligible uses also come into play. Next slide. The really important thing with the conforming the program is about the compensation formula. So as Amy mentioned earlier about this split with the 80% of eligible households, unpaid rental debt, and then the remaining rental debt becomes forgiven. This was, really a foundational piece of SB 91, and this was, done in, with the legislature and in consultation with tenants and landlord advocacy groups. And what we really believe is that this structure will be able to help bring landlords to the table. And bringing landlords to the table allows us to erase rental debt. And so it allows for households and landlords to kind of move together forward through this pandemic and be able to increase housing stability. So this is one of the core foundational pieces of conforming the program, and an area that we, along with the legislature, really do feel is kind of a very important tenet of having successful outcomes across the state. And then the last piece about conformity is that we are saying that a local rental assistance program may not add additional programmatic requirements that may inhibit participation in the program. So for instance, that could be requiring that an applicant provide citizenship documents. We would not allow for that. We want to make sure that these dollars are accessible and that they meet the intended goal of rental stability and debt reduction. Okay, next slide. So I think I've covered quite a bit of this already, but just to kind of put it all in one place, in the creation of this program, both in terms of the structure and the key components of SB 91, this I think are the points that we were really trying to achieve, and I won't belabor them because I think I've mentioned most of them already. But you'll have a copy of this deck, and this is really what we think is foundational to how we created this structure. So next slide. And this is what the structure looks like for the state administered portion of the emergency rental assistance program. So we've set up a program management team where housing and community development is the lead, and then there are advisory roles with the financial protection and innovation department, fair employment and housing, real estate, and social services departments. Program delivery is going to be managed through housing and community development, working in very close partnership with an advisory team that will be comprised of participating jurisdictions and key stakeholders that are part of this program. We are using a contracted model to be able to manage these requirements. So the first portion of this is the centrally administered rental assistance program. And that's essentially a contract vehicle that will administer the state program for the cities and counties under 200,000, and also provide an option for cities and counties over 200,000 and tribal governments to have its administrative support for their federal allocation and their state share as well. we will be running an education and outreach campaign that really works to help communicate the standard approach, the messaging, the targeting, and be able to make sure that that information is consistent, available, and dispersed in a way that really helps with the goals. And we're getting ready to issue that contract in the next couple of days. And then also we have a portion of block granted money where the state will be putting out block grants through HCD to jurisdictions that wish to administer directly both their federal and state portion. So next slide. So just digging in a little bit more deeply into the emergency rental assistance program centrally administered itself. So as you can see, oh, thank you, that's easier. There's kind of quite a large responsibility that comes to play here. It's the design and the build. So it's making sure that the technology, the application portal, the accessibility of the platform is all in place, mobile, multilingual. It'll be having that structure for jurisdictions to be able to opt in via HCD, to be able to take benefit from this centrally administered but locally facing structure. Creation of simplified eligibility requirements and program documents to essentially be able to meet all of the state and federal policy goals. The immense amount of coordination that will be needed to do the communications of the program strategy and content within the communications and education contractor, as well as to coordinate and share information and strategy with those who elect to go for the block grant program. Also, really importantly, we're asking for the creation of a local partner network that will support targeted client outreach and successful inflow of applications into the central program. So if you look at this chart, you can really see that the goal is to be able to have public-facing state and local partner network that really emphasizes local, so that there can be ownership, there can be kind of that really personalized, localized, public-facing portion of the contract. But then once the applications go into the system, then there's standardization. We're centralizing our administrative costs. We're able to do things like set up a call center with 27 languages and be able to field the kind of the millions of applications that are going to be coming through this process, and then also be able to do a lot of the kind of the hard work around technical assistance. Touch points with applicants to help them be able to get through the whole process, fraud prevention, privacy controls, and then making the payment and doing the reporting to be able to ensure that the allocation of the funds is done consistent with the federal and state requirements. So next slide. So just getting a little bit more into what those partner networks look like. So there are already a number of established structures, local offices, and vast partnership networks that exist already. But really then our CDFI, the Community Development Financial Institution, will then be working very quickly to be able to ramp up that partner network. So that would be partnering directly with localities, community-based organizations, advocacy and support groups, to be able to form partnerships based off of promotion, outreach, and technical assistance. And those will be paid and unpaid depending on the level of effort and what the partner is interested and able to do. So we'll be doing a website. We'll get a website up shortly to be able to gather interest in partnerships, to be able to make sure that that structure has adequate coverage across the state. Okay, next slide. And then just kind of a quick one on the education and communications contractor. This is the same structure where we'll have central messaging, communications, ad buys, translation, and placement. But then that information will be put into a toolkit type of format so that then the partner network is able, and counties are able to use that information to then really add any niche or specialized changes to the central messaging to ensure that it really resonates with the target audience. There also will be substantial boots on the ground outreach, and so through these partnerships. And so this content and collateral will be helpful to them as they're doing that in-person work. Next slide. Okay, so counties over 200,000. What are the decisions that you'll be needing to make as this rolls out? So as you can see, there are ultimately options A, B, and C that we are asking for you to provide back feedback today on where you're leaning, and then commit to an option by the 12th. So I'll just walk through these quickly. So if you are county over 200,000 and you have no existing rental program, or you're unwilling or unable to self-administer the new program, just might have a lot of the other stuff going on. And we get that. And that's why we're kind of creating this option. So in this case, then you would direct your US Treasury allocation to housing and community development. And then that would be paired with that state 55% reservation for your county. So that would more than double the amount that you have currently from the Treasury. You would be able to retain 1.5% of your federal allocation to be able for local use. So we're hearing great stories about what that could look like. It could be anything from kind of augmented partnership networks, communications, support for mediation, legal aid, administrative costs to be able to help manage and coordinate some of this work. So that money would be staying with the locals. The remainder would then be administered through the central program, with the full value being spent on your county. The second strand is if you have an existing rental program and you elect to self-administer this new program. So the first thing would be if you're requesting a block grant from HCD, then you would have to be willing to conform your federal allocation to match the state program requirements. And again, this is really to make sure that the consistency of options for landlords and tenants living within one space, so that there aren't kind of two competing or conflicting programs being run at the same time, really to help kind of ease the process for decision makings for landlords and households as they're navigating the rental assistance program. So we just have one check in there where if you're a county that's between 200,000 and 499,000 in population, we just have an attestation as part of the request for the block grant, just to make sure that you'll be able to meet the requirements of the federal and state program. And why that's in there is because we're really aware that the CARES resources were only allocated to jurisdictions that were over 500,000. And so we know that many of you are coming to this without having the federal program already established over the last year. And so option B is essentially the federal and state allocations are administered through your county, and they would be in alignment with the full state program. And one thing about the block grant, we do have a process in SB 91 where those funds would revert back to the state if the county is unable to expend those resources in line with the federal timelines. It looks a little more aggressive in SB 91 because I think we wanted to make sure we had those built-in touch points. But the plan would be to work with each county as they're going through that process, use those checkpoints to see if there was any support that we can provide from the state level, and work together to help you be successful with implementing within the federal timeframe. But then ultimately, if there is a challenge with implementation, then still having the mechanism to be able to get those dollars out and put them back through the CDFI, so we don't lose those state resources back to the federal government. And then the third option is, again, if a county has an existing rental program and elects to self-administer its new program, but it's not willing to conform its federal allocation to the state program. And this part gets, this is an option that's outlined in SB 91, but it gets pretty tricky. Because the federal allocation would then be administered through the county, and the state allocation would be then administered through the state administered program to applicants that fall within your county. But we'd have to really figure out that duplication of benefits. And then we'd also have to really work through the messaging and how to communicate that to constituents so they really understand how to be successful in getting their rental debt cleared, which I think becomes more complicated when we have competing program structures. And then just finally, we are kind of going to keep our eyes on our statewide numbers so that come September 30th, we would like to have expended more than 65% of the state resources so that we could be positioned to receive additional treasury dollars from states that were unable to spend their money. So we would reallocate those back into both category A and then as well as into the set aside for the counties under 200,000. And next slide. Okay. I think you can probably tell from the way I introduced that flow. We really strongly recommend jurisdictions choose option A or B. We just think that it's the consistency for landlords and tenants is very important. We want to be able to maximize the funds to serve the most households, and by being able to have that write down of the 80% owed, we're able to stretch the resources. And then also make sure that there's also a mechanism to clear debt so that tenants can go forward in a way that is going to be more meaningful and impactful for their household. That was a very, very complicated portion of the negotiation that was done with the legislature, the advocates, landlords and tenants. And there was a lot of thought going into that structure to be able to help households get through this pandemic in a way that's most sustainable. So we're really driving in on this option A and option B. Also, it just de-risks the program for everybody because then the duplication of benefits and a lot of the issues that come with fraud and with fraudulent applications, we can really minimize by having conformity and being able to work together in terms of program design and being able to share information and lessons across both the state administered portion and the block grant program. And then option C is definitely an option that's available for you, but we think it adds a lot of risk. And we also think that it could lead towards delayed payments to tenants and landlords because we'd have to go through a much more extensive duplication of benefits process before we could be able to administer those dollars into your county. So next slide. So just very quickly, the dates. We have been spending the last week really spending a lot of time with meetings, webinars, information sharing. I know a lot of you have reached out to us directly to talk through your specific county questions and challenges, and we're very open to more of those conversations. We think that they help answer your questions, but they also, if you've been on our presentation, you can tell we're continuing to make changes to make sure that your questions are being addressed as we design this program structure. So today we are asking for an expression of intent survey to be completed. This is not binding. This just helps us get an understanding of the landscape to see where jurisdictions are leaning in. That will help us be able to do some more advanced program planning and be ready to issue standard agreements and be able to activate the partner networks in a much more meaningful way if we have a bit of a heads up. So February 12th is then the due date for the expression of intent form. So you'll send that to HCD, selecting option A, B, or C. And from that will lead towards an exchange of standard agreements. It will either lead towards a standard agreement where HCD administers a block grant to the county, or it will lead towards a standard agreement that facilitates the transfer of your federal allocation to the state to be able to administer the back-end program for your county. We are working very quickly to meet the deadlines in the statute to be able to open application portal by March 15th, and then also be able to issue the standard agreements out to jurisdictions who choose a block grant as quickly as possible as well. So I think that is the end of my slides. So Veronica, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Amy and Lynn. Just wanted to remind everybody about our Housing is Key campaign that we launched last September in response to AB 3088. It was really a tool to provide resources to tenants, landlords, homeowners, and our community partners to educate them about the eviction protections. I mean, it's being updated as we speak to include information about the rental assistance program. And so you can go on there, and the forms that are there have been updated to reflect the changes made in SB 91. They look really similar to what was previously up there, but they have been updated. Also, the information is available in English and Spanish. And for any of your constituents that don't know where they fall in the AMI range, there's a calculator on the website so they can figure that out before they apply for the rental assistance. And in communicating to our communities, we were looking at where's the most need. So there's a geography of needs map on the website that would help us target and pinpoint where our communication needs to happen to make sure we get the best applicants for the rental assistance program. And there's also an assistance line in 18 different languages. I'm really trying to target those most in need, multilingual, multicultural, to make sure that these funds are placed in the hands that really need them. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris and his team for any questions and comments that you may have. Thank you.
If participants would like to ask a question verbally, please use the raise your hand function and we can open that up as well.
So let me read. There are a couple that I would, people have questions about duplication of benefits. I've seen that a few times in here. Let me read it and maybe Lynn and I together can respond. So one question is quite specific from Laylee Thomas. Our county used CDBG CV funds for emergency rental assistance, and how will deduplication be done with new state funds and these funds? And then similarly, let me just share that Ted Tabor asked, how will the state cooperate with counties to share information for duplication of benefit checks under option C? I'm trying to think. I think those are the two kind of generally broad ones. Do you want to start with that, Lynn?
Sure. Well, thank you for the questions. So for the CDBG funds, I think there are kind of a couple ways to think about that. So I think first is there, depending on how you are tracking that information, it would be being able to do like an address match as a starting point. I think if it's been captured and created and it's in kind of a format that's able to then be sent up to the state central data system, then that would be one way that could be done between the state and the local, to make sure that if the state is administering resources for option A, that all of that information comes up first and gets put into our system, so that we would check based off of the timing and make sure that there weren't coverage over those same months. Because I think it's really important to remember too that if a household received resources, let's say 6 months ago that covered 2 months, they still have unpaid debt that's still eligible in the months that follow that didn't have support from the CDBG program. So I think it'd be being able to get that information around like address and the dates that the payments were covering. So I think that's if it's more of the block grant structure, then I think that would probably be more internalized. And so it would be just within your own systems doing like address checks and time checks, and being able to kind of set up a process to be able to do that before you disperse funds. With option C, it gets a little trickier because I think the solution would still be, I believe, linked to an exchange of information about payments that had already been made. And so for past programs, that would be easier, because I would assume you could kind of share that information up with the state, and then there could be, you could do we could do an address check of some sort, but for current programs that are running at the same time, so with this new resources, there'd have to be some kind of timing cadence that was set up, so that there was an ongoing exchange of addresses and information back and forth, to continually be able to make sure that duplication of benefits weren't existing during the kind of the new program. So I hope that answers the question. But I think, let me just add one thing quickly, is that I think part of the value of having this survey of intention early is that it gives us time to kind of work with each county and kind of really think through what that looks like, because it will probably be a little bit different depending on the how rental assistance was expended previously and the status of that data and how kind of absorbable that data is into the state structure. Yeah, I think that's all I have on that.
Shall I just go ahead and read another one? Unless there are hands up, I can't see all those indicating. Chris, are there any that you want to grab from live questions, or can I keep going through the list?
Sure. Portia, can we open up Tom Haynes? And he's had his hand up for a while.
Good morning, thank you. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about the state's capacity to administer such a large program. I suspect that a lot of counties, including ours, are attracted to the state option and are leaning that direction, but there has been some concern locally about whether or not the state, in fact, can manage such a large program, including so many jurisdictions, so much funding, as well as getting the funds out the door quickly, given the compensation limitations that have been applied in SB 91.
Thanks, Tom. So to kind of get to this structure that we proposed, partnering with the CDFI, we essentially went through, I think, a pretty robust review of all of the different kind of existing structures and programs, and thought through how to be able to best address the kind of the system requirements in terms of being able to have kind of technology that can manage all of the inflow and the user, essentially the use on the platform. And then we also thought a lot about like the estimates on the number of kind of human touch points, technology touch points per application, and then thought a lot about the kind of the percentage of applications that we thought would kind of come into the system and then need additional additional information back and forth, or had to go into that pot where they were flagged for like fraud issues, where then that requires more human intervention as well. And so as we were thinking through kind of all of those complexities, that was how we got to the contracted solution. Because I think what you're maybe not seeing from kind of the slides we presented is that the CDFI model actually has a teaming structure behind it, where it uses a variety of subcontractors to be able to manage that surge capacity. So being able to, add people very quickly and easily to call centers, being able to build up, larger teams to be able to do the fraud checks on applications that have been flagged. Being able to kind of surge in that way felt much more manageable in a centralized structure, with then the flexibility of the private sector, all of course under control of HCD's program team. The other thing too, you're thinking about is that we were thinking about the kind of there's the front work, and then there's like the back work. And so some of the elements around like program design, system checks, technology build, we also felt that, and we kind of saw this in the pricing too, that by being able to centralize a lot of that work, you can kind of decrease some of the costs up front to program development, design, technology build out, et cetera, so that then you have additional resources to then really deploy a much more robust labor team on the back end to manage the intricacies of what happens once an application comes into a portal. So we've kind of thought, we've taken a pretty, I think, conservative approach in terms of what we're estimating for application throughput, touch points for each application. And I think we designed and costed out a solution that seems to get there. Of course, there always are going to be variables. There are going to be things that we don't anticipate. And so that's also the value of being able to have that subcontracted team as well, so that if you need to lean in more heavily on one of those aspects or the other, then you can do that by managing the deliverables requirements at the contract. So that's and then the other thing too, I think is important, is that there's kind of there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the public facing portion, and then that back end management. And so the way that we're structuring this is we really do envision that partner network to be doing a lot of the front facing work, so that those are individuals who live in the community, they're organizations that are already deeply invested and embedded within the community groups, They are, in many cases, jurisdictions themselves that want to own and like be the front face of this rental assistance program so that it becomes a county-led program that then makes use of the back end of the state apparatus. And so I definitely hear the concern because we've been thinking through all those kind of really immense number questions as well, but think that we have a system that is responsive.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Can we go next to Vienna Barnes, Portia?
Good morning and thank you. Question from us is we've applied and received the U.S. Treasury funding. If we decide then to turn the funds over to the state, will the state execute an agreement fully assigning the grant and release the county from the grant liability to the Fed? So will you execute an agreement and release the county of liability?
That's a great question, and I really wish we had one of our attorneys on the line from HCD to be able to answer that. But I believe that's the structure, because it would be essentially a standard agreement where we take the resources, and so and then we also take on the responsibility to the Treasury. So yeah, I think that would be the case. But let me circle back with our attorneys and see what the language in the standard agreement is envisioned to look like. But we'll make sure we have an answer to that pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. And a question that I've seen come up that maybe you can speak to a little bit during my conversations with counties is, again, if locals do assign their direct federal allocation to the state, what are the sort of guardrails to ensure that residents of that particular community are benefiting from the aid available here?
Sure, great question. So if you think back on that distribution table that I put up on the slides earlier, where you see the amount that's allocated for your county, that would be the portion that would be reserved for just your county. And so the goal would be to use the communications, the subcontracted, like the partner network, to be able to do really specific outreach, to be able to make sure that we get applications in that align with the value that's reserved for the county. So that would be, I think we would be working from that centrally. We would also, really encourage the county itself and its kind of key partners to be, pushing applicants through as well, directing, referencing, making sure that their folks know that this is their program, this is intended for their community, and this is how they access it, and kind of getting those applications in as well. We would be setting up the advisory council that would be kind of troubleshooting and kind of working through any issues as they arise with local jurisdictions. And then also we envision a reporting structure where, potentially on like a weekly basis, the county would get a report that showed here's kind of the status of their reservation. So here's the number of applications that have come in, or here's the number that have gotten to different stages in the application process, and then ultimately this is the amount that's been dispersed into their county. And so there would be kind of that live monitoring of the resources as they're going out.
Great, and just to put a finer point on it, the bill does allow sort of reallocations based on demand. It's my read that there's not really a date certain when those are made. There's some communications requirements with the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. But I guess, would it be fair to say that as we get closer to that 65% obligation date, that's when you would expect those things to happen? I just think it's a question that will come up in local communities. Like, okay, we understand the initial reservation, but when does that flexibility really kick in?
Miles, you want to take that?
Yeah,
I saw you come on.
Yeah, happy to take that one. It's a really good point, Chris, and that's something that we've built into the, just trying to get ahead of the federal clawback requirements, right? So all those timelines that we provide at the state level are really built off of that. So through the summer, that 65% that we have in terms of trying to get ahead of that September 30th date that's provided under federal law. So ideally having a better sense of what the demand is, and then also building in our own reallocation in a way to make sure all the unmet demand is met before even the federal clawback features start kicking into gear, which are still yet to be defined. And we anticipate that being part of the initial round of guidelines. So we're also anticipating making sure we're flexible in adapting to that change.
Great, thank you. I'd like to go next to Dina Fuentes from San Bernardino. Portia, if you can unmute her.
Morning. I wanted a couple follow-up questions. One on the liability question. If a county opts to provide funds to the state, and if that local jurisdiction isn't spending, like in our case, it would be almost $100 million for San Bernardino County residents, does the state then at some point in time sweep those funds, including the county treasury allocation, and reallocate it to higher demand areas?
Thank you, Dana. So no, we wouldn't sweep the federal portion. We would just sweep back the block grant that the state administered.
Yes, and I would just add, thank you, Dina, for that question. I think there was a couple other questions in the chat earlier about, the distinction between the state's authority to claw back funds and then also the authority from the federal government to claw back those funds. So any jurisdiction that receives funds directly through Treasury, just think of that as a contract between the jurisdiction and Treasury. We would not have authority over clawing back those funds. But what we have contemplated is trying to align our timelines for funds that the state is distributing to jurisdictions. So think of it in terms of that conformity, not necessarily that we have the authority to claw back or impact those direct funds that you're utilizing at the local level.
And if I can just add to, I think with the block grant options, that's option B, we would really want to avoid being in that situation, because I think the ultimate solution in option B is that the jurisdiction has the support, has kind of access to, like, as we're developing out program documentation, checklists, processes, and being able to share that with you so that you can get up and running as quickly as possible. We would make sure that there were forums to be able to do kind of lessons learned shared across all of the different the partners who are kind of implementing the same program across a variety of states. We would be looking at like some kind of exchange of information so that we can help make sure that the communications are responsive to support the block grant program, that they're targeted to areas that maybe you're having a harder time getting to target populations. So we'd really work in like close partnership to avoid getting to that point where there would have to be some kind of pullback to make sure that those resources don't leave the state. So I feel like that's kind of like the nuclear option that we wouldn't want to get to, and that we would have a lot of like joint partnership, joint programming and support that would go into helping jurisdictions be successful in implementing their block grants.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Can we go next to Trina Perez, Portia?
Hi, it's actually Shaniqua Freeman from the County of San Bernardino. Thank you for hosting this and giving us the opportunity to ask questions. I actually have 3 follow-up questions. The main one for me would be in terms of the standard agreement, is it anticipated, I know your counsel isn't online, but if maybe someone could follow up, is it anticipated that the Treasury would be a party to that standard agreement acknowledging the assignment and the assumption of the responsibility? Because the counties have entered into an agreement with the Treasury, which inherently those responsibilities come in that agreement. So I just want to make sure that whichever decision we decide, if it is based on a release of liability, that the Treasury would acknowledge that release of liability. And I know you might not have the answer to that one right now, but if you do, you could chime in, but I do have 2 other questions. The other question would be, what is your anticipated rollout date for your program? Because these timelines are so truncated. And one of the other callers mentioned that there has been some discussion about ability to be able to meet those timelines by the state. So I'm just curious when rollout is expected. I'll let you answer that. And then I have one more question.
Thank you. So I don't envision that the Treasury would be party to the agreement. So in SB 91, we did include some language that essentially covers that requirement, that allows for that facilitates the transfer of funds between a jurisdiction and HCD. So we did kind of purposely put in a clause there to kind of help facilitate that. We will take this back to the attorneys and make sure that there's nothing we're missing here. But we've communicated the intention to the Treasury on how this program would work, and haven't haven't received anything back that indicates that it's problematic. But we'll make sure that that's in our FAQs, so that there's just like certainty around how that works. And then the anticipated rollout. So we are targeting March 15th, which is an SB 91 statutory requirement for the central program to open applications. And then we would be issuing standard agreements to jurisdictions. I think we're anticipating kind of like about a week turn or so if the signatures come back from the county in a timely fashion, for the standard agreements for the block grant. Of course, if people put in their expression, if they put in their intent form early, then that process starts earlier. So the 12th is the last day, but if you want to put it in earlier, then that would kick off the standard agreement process faster.
Okay, thank you. And can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can, and I think you had one more question.
I did. I have one more question. In terms of LISC being the facilitator of the program and needing to rely on the local partnerships, will a local preference be given to partners within the particular county to help with the administration of the program? Because I know that's going to be, depending on which route we go, just making sure that we have an inclusion of our network is going to be probably one of their most salient concerns.
Absolutely. I think that is the way to do this. So when we think about this, we think it's about organizations and entities, jurisdictions that are, that are invested, that have relationships, that have people who physically live in the county. All of those, I think, are incredibly important to being successful with this structure. So yes, absolutely. Location is a key component of choosing those partners. And the other thing too is, if a jurisdiction, we'll create a process to be able to get input and be able to collect information on partners that want to be part of that network. We'll make sure that we send this out through Chris and his team so that you all get it as well. So that you can also share that with your partners. And encourage them to submit their names to be part of the network.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great, and I know we're a little past 10 a.m., but we started a couple minutes late. So unless some of the panelists need to head off to other meetings, I'm hoping we can answer at least one more question from Francina Martinez.
I just have one question, but kind of two parts. So if we chose option A, the 1.5% of the federal money that would be allocated to the county, is that something that we have a choice to not take, or do we have to take it? And part two is, if we chose to take that 1.5% and chose option A, what would our reporting liability be? Would it be to the Treasury or to the state?
Thank you. That's a great question. So in terms of if you don't, I guess you don't have to take it. I guess that would just be part of like maybe an option in the standard agreement if that were the case. I don't think that would be a problem to not take the money. And then Chris, you're jumping on, so maybe you have commentary on the reporting piece.
Yeah, Chris Cook from Finance. So I believe as the state being the entity that's receiving those portion of the funds, the 1.5, the onerous would be for those local jurisdictions to report to the state. The state would then have to report to the federal government on that piece. But as for the direct allocations, local governments would need to be reporting on those portions. So it would be kind of this two-prong approach, right? Based on how the federal government allocated those dollars to the state.
Hi, this is Dinah. So my question has to do with option B. So I understand that under option B, the state's portion would go to the county government. We would sign an agreement and administer both the federal and state funding under the conforming local rules. My question has to do with when under this arrangement, the state, let's say, takes back its funding if it's unspent by August 1st, the U.S. Treasury portion that the county already has can continue to roll forward, but is it also then bound to the state conforming regulations after the state has taken back its state portion? In other words, do the state rules taint the federal U.S. Treasury program locally for the remainder, the duration of the U.S. Treasury program at the county level?
Hi, Dinah. Thanks for that question. I actually was seeing in the Q&A, so I'm glad you asked it. It was going to take me a little bit longer to type it out in terms of response, but it's a very good question. And this is something we're contemplating providing further specificity in the program guidelines. But, as a general matter, our perspective is that, we're trying to influence alignment with both local and state resources that are being provided to the program. So that's very much the intention for when we are, as a matter, asking for whether a local program is in conformity. So in the event under your scenario in which we have to claw back state block grant funds for whatever reason, I do not anticipate that the local assistance provided directly from Treasury would be impacted by that, but that is something I'm glad you brought up, and we've thought about it a bit, and we'll look to address that expressly in the guidelines.
Great. Well, out of respect for our panelists' time, I know we're now 6 minutes past the hour. I want to thank everyone for their attendance and for their thoughtful questions. CSAC will be sharing the slides from today to all the registered participants. And if you have additional questions, you can send them to me via email. I'll make sure our panelists get them and so they can respond to you. And I assume many of you also are in direct contact with our partners at BCSH. And HCD. One final thing I do want to pitch, CSAC is holding a webinar with one of our corporate partners next week, Witt O'Brien's, on some potential strategies about how counties can use their funds locally and get those out if that is the option that they choose. And so the details for that are up on the screen. It will be coming out to a broader communication after the details are all set. But again, want to say thank you to Lynn and Amy and all of our panelists from BCSH today. Appreciate the partnership and the open communication, and thank everyone for attending. That's a wrap from me. Thanks.